These are the best of times. These are the worst of times. This is an age of wisdom. This is an age of foolishness. This is an epoch of belief. This is an epoch of incredulity. This is the season of light. This is the season of darkness. This is the spring of hope. This is the winter of despair. We have everything for us. We have nothing for us. What Charles Dickens said in his A Tale of Two Cities is becoming more and more relevant by the day. Clearly, there are two worlds living on this planet. I'm Surabhi N from ISS International School, and today I'm going to be talking about slumdogs and millionaires. We live in an age of staggering economic inequality. It's unlike anything we've ever seen before. The rich are getting richer while the poor are getting poorer, and the difference between the two is sky high. Let us start by looking at some data. While the rich enjoy the technological advancements of the modern world, from air cons and escalators everywhere to Flappy Birds on their smartphones, 1.2 billion still live without any access to electricity. While the rich have access to much more than enough food, 8 million suffer from chronic hunger every day, and 2.6 million kids die each year because of not having adequate nutrition. The modern world generates a wealth of around $240 trillion, and yet the richest 1% owns around half of it. 1% of the population owns the same amount of wealth as the rest 6.93 billion people. The 3 richest people in the world own more financial assets than the 48 poorest nations combined. We live in a system where these different economic classes exist closely together in the same environment. In many places around the world, it's a common sight to see these contrasting lifestyles simultaneously. For example, Mumbai, the financial capital of India, is home to the world's most expensive house, the Antilla. Owned by an Indian businessman, the Antilla includes ballrooms, theaters, swimming pools, helicopter pads, and is run by a staff of 600 servants. In all, it is 27 stories of exquisiteness and luxury. And now, if you drive just for a little bit in Mumbai itself, you'll come upon Dharavi, one of the world's largest slums. Over 1 million people live here in small, crowded places. It affords 1 toilet per 1,440 residents. The lanes are piled with trash and lined with open, reeking sewers. And for some families, generations have stayed here and yet have not been able to unshackle themselves from grave poverty. And such scenarios can be seen everywhere around the world. We cannot plainly say that it's a phenomenon of poor countries only. Economists use various methods to measure and quantify the economic inequality. One of the more popular ones is the Gini index. A Gini index of 0 represents complete equality, while a Gini index of 1 represents complete inequality. As you can see here, Scandinavia is doing quite well, while South American countries aren't doing that great, but clearly inequality exists everywhere. Also, inequality has been steadily rising. In fact, there's much more inequality in South Africa today than there was during the time of the apartheid, which was when people were literally separated by their class and color. So there are many rich people in the world, and there are many poor people in the world. But why should you care? How does it affect you? What comes along with income inequality? You might not realize it, but inequality negatively affects us all. It is negatively related to a country's economic growth. With high levels of inequality, we cannot have economic prosperity. Data suggests if inequality hadn't risen in the UK in the last 10 years, its GDP growth would have been 10% higher. In fact, accelerating disparity could trigger a recession, and that would be a problem for all of us. Then there are other problems of social nature as well. Inequality fuels crime, corruption, civil unrest, conflict, and unjust legal systems. A glaring example of this is Somalia. 43% of the population here lives under the poverty line. The country has seen a rough history of a few powerful people leading and controlling the rest. The lower classes have been suppressed for a long, long time. Soon, they started to revolt, and civil war broke out in Somalia in 1991. And the unrest still continues. Since the lower classes didn't have much to lose, they easily got involved in criminal activities. They formed groups and used violent methods to gain over the few resources. In recent years, Somalia has been a hub for piracy. Terrorism is another issue, where the have-nots are much more likely to get involved. Another problem that develops is of trust. In an unequal society, people do not have the same sense of security and trust. The rich have an upper hand and control much of the lower classes. And since they contribute to a large amount of tax revenues, their demands are looked after first. This gives way to corruption and degeneration of society. An apt example of this would be the Rana Plaza incident 2 years ago. Rana Plaza was a commercial building in Dhaka, the capital of Bangladesh, that housed a few garment factories. On April 23, 2013, the local media aired a footage of the building showing the numerous cracks, and the building was evacuated immediately. Later that day, the owner of the factories, a powerful businessman and a politician, said in a statement that the building was absolutely safe and he ordered all the workers to return to work. They were all from the lower classes, uneducated and desperate for money. They had no choice but to return. Their priority was the odd $2 they made per day. The next day, the building collapsed, killing 1,130 people. It was the deadliest structural failure accident of the modern age. Then there are health issues as well, like drug abuse, mental illness, and lower life expectancies. And now, even though these problems might not seem so relevant in Singapore, they very much are in India, where I come from. And you might have similar experiences in your countries. I see signs of corruption and sickness everywhere I go, and I don't feel a strong sense of security. With economic inequality, we cannot have sustainable economic or social development. So what is causing these? Why are we not able to arrest the rise in inequalities? A few decades ago, 35% of the population of jobs required a post-high school education. Today, that number has increased to 65%. And even though our demands for skill have gone up, they have not been adequately matched by our education systems. A quality education today requires money, and those who can't afford it lose all opportunities. We have created a rigid poverty cycle which causes and increases inequality. And if this continues, soon the only way to be financially secure would be to be born in a rich household. Next is capitalism. Inequality is an inevitable and automatic byproduct of capitalism. So now that we know that inequalities exist, and they're bad, and they're inevitable, what can we do? We have to break this cycle, but how? Why not just redistribute all the wealth and live happily ever after? 240 billion was added to the world's 100 richest billionaires in the year 2012 alone. And this would be enough to end extreme poverty not once, but 4 times. But this is not a fairy tale. It's much more complicated than that. Inequalities can be reduced through a better education system that gives everyone an equal and fair opportunity. They can also be reduced by reforming our tax and social schemes. But you and I cannot do much to change the systems, at least not just yet. What we can do is help others. We can be more grateful for what we have and help those in need. Because if half of us are left behind, none of us can move forward.